competing visions for Troost today. In one, the market dictates what's going to be here tomorrow. But in the other, we as a community get to decide what's at 31st and Troost. Let's go back and look at how Troost became what it is today. Before the founding of the United States, this area was in the heart of the Osage Nation. Troost was a trail where the Osage peoples would take their canoes to the Missouri River. But in 1808, not knowing what the settlers intended to do, the Osage Nation transferred their land to the United States for pennies on the dollar. In the mid-1800s, 31st and Troost bordered the 65-acre Porter Plantation, where Reverend James Porter and his family owned between 40 and 100 slaves. Because this land was so well cultivated by the Porter slaves, after the Civil War, it became prime real estate. From 25th to Linwood along Troost were some of the most beautiful and elegant homes in Kansas City. It was known as Millionaire's Row. The boom that was the 1870s and 80s was the bust of the 1890s, and a 10 to 15-year depression set in. But life began to come back to this area when immigrant families from the Greek community, the Jewish community, and others moved here and opened businesses. It was very diverse, with 186 businesses within just 2 city blocks. In 1954, the desegregation of schools prompted some pretty dramatic changes in our city. Fueled by discrimination, a collaboration took place. Real estate companies encouraged white people to move to the new and beautiful suburbs. Neighborhood associations began blocking black families and others from moving to certain areas. Banks left minority neighborhoods, and Troost became the boundary line for school districts. By the 1980s, when Reconciliation Services was just starting to work in this area, Troost had become the economic and racial dividing line of our city. But the story doesn't end there. Thelma's story is the story of our community. Her life is also a testimony of how we can move forward together.
When I met her, she was already taking people in and caring for them on the street. Our first month of marriage, we had 20 people living with us. She loved to care for people. She was a mother and a grandmother in the community. So we thought, well, why don't we do something a little different? So instead of just distributing food, since so many people need food, why don't we just cook it right here? And we turned it into what was called Grace's Kitchen. My kids always talked about Thelma's fried chicken. And then she would make these corn cakes. You know, it was like really knowing how to touch people's stomach with comfort food.
We've come to a time when so many of the people who've labored on Troost are gone now. And so the kitchen at Reconciliation Services is the continuation, the building upon, the stewarding of the Catholic Worker House's hospitality, Grace's Kitchen openness and willingness to feed anyone and everyone, the radical love of Thelma. Since the beginning, our vision has been to transform Troost from a dividing line into a gathering place, a place of hope and healing for everyone. In Dutch, the word Troost means comfort, and that's how we see it here. It's a place where people can begin to address their disparities,
begin to address issues of celebrating diversity, that it began to cause economic impact that was enabling the entire city to thrive. So as we stop and we reflect upon the dividing line, if we begin to work together towards really beginning to work at this as individuals and as working as this as agencies and businesses and the community, we can begin to have this feeling of village that transcends any particular group so that all the ships rise together.
So every single person who comes to RS, who comes to Troost, can find their value, their worth, their strength, and together we can thrive as a neighborhood, as a city, and even as a nation.